What happens when a fairy tale wedding turns into a battlefield? Picture this: a magnificent Hamptons estate. A billionaire, groom on the verge of securing his dynasty, and a beautiful bride from one of New York's most powerful families. The scene is perfect, a meticulously crafted illusion of happiness. But an illusion is all it is. In a moment that will go down in society legend. The cathedral doors swing open, revealing a second woman, also in a wedding dress. She is the ghost of his past, an ex-girlfriend he brutally discarded and legally banned from this very event. She isn't here to object. She's here to detonate a secret that will prove that the groom's entire empire is built on a devastating lie. Stay with me as we unravel the story of Julian Croft and the day his carefully constructed world came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. The late June sun was a paid actor. It streamed through the stained glass windows of the St. Ignatius Chapel in the Hamptons, bathing the assembled guests in a holy golden light that felt both sanctifying and fantastically expensive. Every detail of the wedding of Julian Croft to Charlotte Van Doren had been curated with the precision of a military campaign. The flowers alone cascading waterfalls of peonies and Dutch hydrangeas cost more than the average American's annual salary. The guest list was a constellation of East Coast power, old money scions, tech titans, senators, and the kind of tastemakers whose approval could mint a brand overnight. Julian Croft stood at the altar, a man sculpted by ambition. His Tom Ford tuxedo was flawless, his posture impeccable. But a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his brow, a lone crack in the marble facade. He was 34 years old and on the precipice of achieving everything he had ever wanted. Croft Innovations, his AI logistics company, had made him a billionaire. Today, marrying Charlotte, he wasn't just gaining a wife, he was acquiring a legacy. The Van Dorens were old New York, their name etched onto museum wings and university libraries. They were the one thing his new money couldn't buy pedigree. His best man and younger brother Damien adjusted Julian's bow tie with a nervous energy that mirrored his own. "Breathe, man." Damien whispered, his voice a low rumble. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not your bride." Julian forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just want everything to be perfect. But it wasn't perfection he was worried about. It was imperfection. Specifically, one very particular 5'7" imperfection, named Ava Reynolds. 2 weeks ago, he had sat in a sterile conference room with his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gavriel. She is not to get within a 5-mile radius of the venue. Julian had said, his voice as cold and hard as polished steel. He'd slid a photograph across the table. It was a candid shot of Ava laughing, her head thrown back, her brown hair catching the light. It was taken during a time he had worked very hard to forget. Her name is Ava Reynolds. She may try to use an alias. She may try to come as a guest of a guest. I don't care if she's disguised as a nun. You stop her. Am I clear? Crystal. Gavriel had replied, not even glancing at the photo. Consider her a non-entity. But Ava had never felt like a non-entity. She felt like a phantom limb, an ache that returned in the dead of night. She was the ghost of Orchard Street, the 2-bedroom walk-up where they had built his empire on a second-hand laptop and takeout containers of cheap noodles. She was the inconvenient truth he had tried to bury under a mountain of cash and a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to stop a bullet. His gaze flickered towards the front pew where his future mother-in-law, Victoria Van Doren sat like a reigning monarch. Her silver dress was understated and bespoke her posture and advertisement for generations of inherited superiority. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her daughter's, met his for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a look of welcome, but of assessment. She was the gatekeeper, and he knew with chilling certainty that his acceptance was conditional. Victoria didn't approve of him. She approved of his balance sheet. The Van Doren fortune, while respectable, had dwindled. They needed a capital infusion, and Julian was it provided he was as advertised, brilliant, successful, and above all, clean. No scandals, no skeletons. The string quartet, tucked away in a loft, swelled into the opening notes of Wagner's bridal chorus. The low hum of chatter among the guests died instantly. A collective sigh of anticipation rippled through the chapel. The massive oak doors at the back of the aisle swung open. And there she was. Charlotte. She was breathtaking, a vision in custom. Vera Wang, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon from which a diamond-encrusted veil cascaded down her back. Her father, a portly man with a kind but worried face, had her arm tucked in his. As she began her slow, regal procession down the aisle, a genuine smile finally broke across Julian's face. He saw his future walking towards him. The summer home in Nantucket, the penthouse on Park Avenue, the children with their mother's eyes and his ambition. The cover of Forbes, the whispers of respect when he entered a room. Everything he had clawed his way up from poverty to attain. He looked at Charlotte, and for that single fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe the story he had told everyone, including himself. The anxiety receded, replaced by a wave of triumph. He was safe. The ghost had been exorcised. The gilded cage was finally his. Ava Reynolds did not look like a ghost. Ghosts are ethereal, translucent. In the back of a black SUV parked a block away from St. Ignatius, she looked painfully, terrifyingly solid. The wedding dress she wore was not a grand confection like Charlotte's would be. It was a simple, elegant sheath of ivory silk she'd bought at a vintage store years ago, back when a future with Julian had seemed not only possible, but inevitable. It was the dress she would have worn. Putting it on this morning had felt like an act of both sacred remembrance and profound sacrilege. Her best friend Ben Carter sat beside her, his hand gripping hers. His knuckles were white. "Last chance to back out, Ava," he said, his voice gentle. "We can drive to Montauk, get drunk on the beach, and throw rocks at the ocean. No one would blame you." Ava shook her head, her gaze fixed on the chapel spire visible over the treetops. "If I back out now, he wins. He erases me completely." Her mind drifted back, not to the ugly end, but to the brilliant beginning. They had met at a dingy tech incubator in a shared workspace in downtown Manhattan. He was the charismatic visionary with a head full of disruptive ideas. She was the quiet, brilliant coder who saw the structural flaws in his grand designs and knew instinctively how to fix them. They were fat and gasoline. For 3 years, their lives had been a blur of caffeine code and a love so intense it felt like it could power the city. Their apartment on Orchard Street was their entire world. The office was a corner of the living room, where 2 desks were pushed together, their monitors practically touching. Croft Innovations wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born over greasy pizza at 3 a.m., its foundational algorithms written by Ava on a whiteboard, while Julian paced and dreamed out loud. The name itself had been her idea. "It's your name," she'd said. "You're the face. I'm happy to be the engine." That was her mistake. She trusted him. She believed that their love was the only contract they needed. The shift was gradual, then brutally swift. The first round of venture capital changed him. He traded his worn jeans for tailored suits. He started talking about optics and personal branding. He moved their offices to a sleek, impersonal space in the financial district, and suddenly the engine was hidden away in the basement. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. He came back to the Orchard Street apartment, which he hadn't slept in for weeks, and told her it was over. He was clinical detached, like a surgeon removing a tumor. "I'm moving in a different direction," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. "Personally and professionally." "What does that mean?" She'd asked, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "It means the company needs a different kind of public face. We're courting a different class of investor. You and we're not the right story anymore." The right story turned out to be Charlotte Van Doren, whom he'd met at a charity gala 2 months prior. The betrayal of his heart was devastating, but the betrayal of their work was a deeper wound. 2 days after he left, a check arrived via courier for $1 million. With it was the NDA. It was a document of total erasure. It stipulated that she could never claim to have worked for, contributed to, or been a part of Croft Innovations in any capacity. It stated that if she ever spoke of their personal or professional relationship, he would not only sue her for the $1 million back, but would countersue for damages to the company's reputation to the tune of $50 million. It was a gag order, a threat, and an insult all in one. He was buying her history, their history, for a fraction of what it was worth. She never cashed the check. For a year, she was paralyzed by the injustice. She watched from the sidelines as he was hailed as a lone genius, the next Steve Jobs. Every article that praised his innate coding talent felt like a knife twisting in her gut. He had stolen her work, her future, and her past. The wedding announcement was the final catalyst. Seeing his smug, triumphant face next to the perfect society princess lit a fire in her. This wasn't just his wedding. It was his coronation, a celebration of the very lie that had destroyed her. And she decided with a clarity that felt like destiny that she would not allow it to happen. "It's not about winning him back, Ben," she said, her voice low and steady, as she finally turned from the window. "I wouldn't take him back if he were the last man on earth. It's about truth. He gets to stand in that white church and be celebrated as a self-made man. I'm here to remind him and everyone else that he wasn't self-made. He was made by me, and I'm the bill that's finally coming due." Ben squeezed her hand one last time. "Okay, then let's go raise some hell." He got out and opened her door. As Ava stepped out of the SUV, the ivory silk of her dress pooling for a moment on the asphalt, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a reckoning, and she was about to walk into her own wedding. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with ceremonial reverence. The minister, a man with a soothing, practiced cadence, was speaking of unions, partnerships, and the sacred journey of 2 souls. Julian stood facing Charlotte, holding her delicate hands in his. He was so close. The words "I do" were forming on his lips. He gazed into Charlotte's blue eyes, a perfect reflection of the future he'd designed. "And do you, Julian Croft, take Charlotte Van Doren to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or for poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Julian drew a breath. This was it, the final seal on his new life. Boom. The sound was not loud, but it was definitive. It was the sound of the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel being pushed open with force, swinging inward until they banged against the stone walls. Every head in the room swiveled in unison. The string quartet faltered, a single violin screeching into the sudden cavernous silence. And there, framed in the archway, like a spectre at the feast, stood Ava Reynolds. She was a column of pure white against the darkness of the vestibule. Her simple dress, her unbound hair, her lack of a veil. It was a statement of raw, unadorned presence. She wasn't an imitation of the bride at the altar. She was an alternative, a question made flesh. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was a sound of shock, of confusion, and for a few in the know of delicious, unadulterated scandal. Phones previously tucked away emerged as if by magic. The professional photographers, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly, their flashes beginning to strobe like frantic heartbeats, capturing the tableau that would be on the cover of every tabloid. By morning, the groom frozen in horror, the bride, her perfect smile collapsing into a mask of disbelief, and the woman at the door, the other bride. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. It was a nightmare. A living, breathing, silk-clad nightmare. Gabriel had failed. The 5-mile radius, the disguises, the threats, it had all been for nothing. She was here. Charlotte's hands went cold in his. Her head turned slowly from Ava back to him, her eyes wide with a dawning, humiliating horror. Julian, she whispered the name, a fragile question mark. Who is that? But Julian didn't answer. His entire focus was on Ava, who had taken a single deliberate step into the chapel. His shock was rapidly curdling into a white-hot rage. How dare she? How dare she try to ruin this, the most important day of his life? Victoria Van Doren's reaction was faster. With a barely perceptible flick of her wrist, she signaled to the 2 broad-shouldered men in dark suits who had been standing discreetly against the wall. They were her personal security, and they began moving towards Ava instantly, their steps silent and predatory. They were halfway down the aisle when Ava's voice rang out, clear and steady, without a trace of hysteria. It cut through the shocked whispers like a shard of glass. Stop! To everyone's astonishment, the security men actually paused. Her command was absolute. She took another step forward. Her eyes were not on the guards or the stunned guests, or even on Charlotte. They were locked on Julian. It was a gaze that held 3 years of shared history, of love and betrayal and simmering injustice. Before you have me thrown out, Julian, she said, her voice resonating in the chapel's perfect acoustics. Perhaps you should explain to your bride and to her family what this is. Her hand came up, and in it she held a single folded document. It was a simple piece of paper, but she held it like a weapon, or a shield. The security guards looked from her to Julian, then to Victoria, awaiting confirmation to proceed. The entire room held its breath. The minister stood with his mouth agape, his prepared words about love and fidelity dissolving into irrelevance. Julian stared at the paper in her hand, and a new, colder fear washed over him, extinguishing the fire of his rage. He didn't know for certain what it was, but he had a sick, sinking feeling. An NDA could be explained away. A lover's quarrel could be dismissed as drama. But a document was proof. What is this spectacle? Victoria Van Doren's voice was low and lethal as she rose from her seat. Remove her, now. But Ava didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on Julian, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. Go on, Julian. Tell them. Tell them all who I am. The challenge hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was trapped. In front of him stood the perfect future. Behind him stood the undeniable truth. And he knew in that gut-wrenching moment that he could no longer have both. The document in Ava's hand trembled, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. Yet to Julian it seemed to shake the very foundations of the chapel. The world narrowed to that single piece of paper. The scent of the peonies was suddenly cloying, suffocating. The holy light from the stained glass windows felt like an interrogation lamp. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and forward planning, became a frantic cyclone of disastrous outcomes. He saw the gleeful headlines, the plunging stock ticker, the smirks on the faces of his rivals. He saw the Van Doren name, his golden ticket, turning to ash. He had to regain control. He opened his mouth, prepared to unleash a torrent of dismissive lies, to paint her as an obsessed, hysterical stalker. But the words that came out were a pathetic squeak. "It's nothing." He managed his voice, a hoarse croak that betrayed his panic. He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that was supposed to look casual, but was jerky and unconvincing. He turned to Charlotte, forcing his face into a mask of pained sincerity. "Darling, I am so deeply sorry. She's a disgruntled ex. This is a pathetic, desperate stunt for money. Let's just have her removed so we can continue our day." Charlotte, however, was no longer looking at him. Her brief, wounded fawn expression had vanished, replaced by the chillingly focused calm of a predator assessing a threat. The Van Doren instinct for survival, honed over generations of navigating social and financial minefields, was now fully engaged. This was no longer just a romantic humiliation. It had the distinct metallic scent of a business complication. "What is the document, Miss Reynolds?" Charlotte asked. Her voice, unlike Julian's, was perfectly steady, cutting through the chapel's tense silence. She didn't look at Julian for permission. She had taken command. Ava's eyes flickered from Julian to Charlotte, and for a fleeting moment, a glimmer of something unreadable, pity perhaps, or a strange sort of female solidarity passed between them. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "Why don't you ask your fiancé?" she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "He should recognize it. It's the original Articles of Incorporation for Croft Innovations." She let the words hang in the air for a pregnant, devastating beat, her gaze sweeping over the front pews before landing back on Julian. She delivered the final killing blow. "The company he founded. With me." A tidal wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the pews. Co-founder. The word was a poison dart. Julian saw it strike Marcus Thorne, the hedge fund titan whose eyes narrowed in instant, cold calculation. He saw it hit Victoria Van Doren like a physical blow, her regal posture stiffening as the full implication, the one catastrophic possibility her team of lawyers and investigators had missed, slammed into her. This wasn't just a skeleton in the closet. This was a structural flaw in the foundation of the entire deal. "That's a lie!" Julian shouted, his voice finally finding its volume, but cracking with desperation. "A pathetic, baseless lie. Her name is on nothing. She signed an NDA. The mention of the NDA, meant to be a show of force, was a catastrophic mistake. It was an admission that there was something to be silenced, something worth paying for." Victoria's eyes flashed with fury at his stupidity, and then the second, more intimate and far more lethal betrayal of the day. "She's not lying, Julian." The voice was quiet, heavy with a sorrow that made it all the more damning. It came from beside him. It was Damien, his own brother, his best man. Julian whipped his head around, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. But Damien refused to meet his gaze. Instead, his younger brother looked out at the stunned crowd, his face a miserable portrait of guilt and resolve. "I was there," Damien said, his voice gaining strength as he unburdened his conscience. "I was a notary back then, trying to make extra money. I notarized the original partnership agreement in their apartment on Orchard Street. Before the venture capital funding, before the lawyers got involved, before you pushed her out and rewrote the history." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, glistening with tears, found Ava at the back of the chapel. "We all know Ava built this company with you." If Ava's entrance was a bomb, Damien's confession was the dirty radioactive fallout that contaminated everything. Julian stared at his brother, the world tilting on its axis. The betrayal was so absolute, so inconceivable that for a moment he couldn't even feel rage, only a dizzying sense of disbelief. His own blood. The scene finally shattered its fragile container of social decorum and descended into open chaos. The photographers, sensing the story of a lifetime, surged forward like a single organism, their flashes strobing relentlessly. Guests were on their feet, not just whispering, but talking openly, their voices a rising tide of scandalized chatter. The minister, looking utterly lost, had backed away from the altar as if it were cursed. But the real explosion, the one that would level Julian completely, was yet to come. It came not from the ghost at the door, nor the traitor at his side, but from the bride. Charlotte grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into the fine wool of his tuxedo like talons. She yanked him violently to the side behind a large marble pillar, creating a tiny private pocket in the public maelstrom. Her face, moments before a mask of pale shock, was now transformed into a canvas of cold reptilian fury. "You idiot!" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was more terrifying than any shout he had ever heard. "You breathtaking, incompetent, utter idiot!" Julian was reeling his mind, unable to process the speed of his own destruction. "Charlotte, listen to me. I can fix this. I can fix this." She let out a short, incredulous, mirthless laugh. "Fix this with what more lies? More sloppy, half-baked cover-ups?" She leaned in closer, her breath hot against his cheek, her blue eyes like chips of ice. "Did you really think we were that stupid? That my family, the Van Dorens, wouldn't do a background check so deep it would make the CIA blush? We have a whole firm on retainer for this, for vetting new money liabilities, exactly like you." Her words were rapid-fire bullets. "We knew about Ava Reynolds. We knew she was the Orchard Street project. We wrote her off as a manageable risk, a bitter college girlfriend you paid off with $1 million. Pathetic but contained. My mother sat you down in the library 3 weeks ago. She looked you in the eye and asked, 'Julian, are there any other documents? Any other inconvenient partnerships from your past that might emerge?' And you smiled that smug smile of yours, and you lied directly to her face. You didn't just lie to your bride, you fool. You lied to Victoria Van Doren. You have absolutely no comprehension of the catastrophic mistake you have just made." Julian felt a cold dread, slick and oily, creep up his spine. This wasn't the wounded cry of a heartbroken lover. This was the furious post-mortem of a CEO whose merger has just spectacularly imploded due to undisclosed liabilities. "I don't understand," he stammered, the words feeling thick and stupid in his mouth. "Of course you don't," she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "You never did. You were so busy buying your way into our world, you never bothered to understand how it actually works. You saw us as a prize, a name, a beautiful backdrop for your pathetic Horatio Alger story. You never once stopped to ask why. Why we were so eager to welcome a tech billionaire with no family, no history, no pedigree into the fold. She delivered the truth with the brutal efficiency of a guillotine. "My family is broke, Julian," she said, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of glass. "Not poor darling, never that, but broke, leveraged to the hilt on bad real estate deals and my father's disastrous belief in oil futures. One more bad quarter, one more creditor calling in a note, and the whole house of cards comes down. We didn't need your love. We didn't need your charisma. We needed your company. We needed Croft Innovations, a clean, scandal-free, cash-positive asset with a meteoric stock price. It was our life raft." She gestured vaguely towards the chaos in the chapel. "And you, with your secret co-founder and your notarized partnership agreements, have just riddled that life raft with holes. A foundational legal claim to the intellectual property. A public scandal that will send the stock into the toilet before the markets even open on Monday. You haven't just embarrassed me. You have financially ruined us." She took a step back, her assessment complete. Her eyes raked over him one last time with a look of such profound contempt it physically hurt him. "You're not a visionary. You're not a genius. You're a bad investment. You are in every sense of the word completely and utterly worthless." The word hung in the air between them. Worthless. The primal fear he had spent his entire life running from the label he thought his billions had made him immune to was now his final official designation. He looked from Charlotte's face contorted with a rage born of financial desperation to her mother Victoria, who was now standing with her lawyer, her expression not one of anger, but of cool, pragmatic damage control. He looked past them to Ava standing quietly at the back of the chapel, her expression not triumphant, but somber, watching the collapse of the world they had once built together. And in that horrifying, crystallizing moment, Julian Croft finally understood. He wasn't the predator in this gilded jungle. He wasn't the clever hunter who had trapped the perfect prize. He was the prey. He was the golden goose they had lured into their pen, and he had just confessed to his buyers that his eggs were made of lead. He had been played outmaneuvered and utterly, totally vanquished. Charlotte's final hissed word, worthless, was the gunshot that started the race. A race for everyone to distance themselves from Julian Croft as quickly and publicly as possible. The victor by a landslide was Victoria Van Doren. With the calculated poise of a CEO announcing a hostile takeover, she rose from her pew and glided to the front of the chapel. She didn't hurry. Her movements were deliberate, designed to draw every eye. She ignored the minister, who now looked like a bewildered bystander at a multi-car pile-up, and positioned herself at the center of the altar, reclaiming the stage. The murmuring chaos subsided as she prepared to speak. Her voice, when it came, was not raised, but it carried the chilling authority of old money and absolute power. "To our esteemed friends, our family, our honored guests," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled titans of industry and society mavens. She subtly acknowledged Marcus Thorne, the powerful hedge fund manager in the third row, whose fund held a significant stake in Croft Innovations. "You have borne witness today to a most unfortunate and disillusioning event." She paused, letting the drama hang in the air. "The Van Doren family entered into this proposed union in good faith. We believed Mr. Croft to be a man of vision, yes, but also a man of integrity. We believed his narrative of singular, self-made success. It has become painfully, publicly clear that this narrative is a fiction, a deception. She turned her head slowly, her ice-blue eyes pinning Julian to the spot. We have been presented today with evidence corroborated by Mr. Croft's own brother that his success was not his alone. That the very foundation of his company, the value upon which this union was predicated, is built upon a lie of omission, and it would seem the blatant theft of intellectual property. A fresh wave of gasps and frantic whispers rippled through the pews. Victoria had just handed every investor, every journalist, the exact legal terminology they needed. She had weaponized the scandal for them. "This union," she announced, her voice dropping to a lethally calm register, "is hereby terminated. The Van Doren family will not under any circumstances be proceeding with this marriage." She held up a hand to silence the burst of camera flashes. "Furthermore, let me be unequivocal. We will be filing a lawsuit against Mr. Croft for fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of the nuptial contract. We entered into this arrangement under the assumption of his sole ownership of a company whose valuation is now a matter of serious legal jeopardy. He has not only humiliated my daughter and betrayed our trust, he has attempted to defraud my family. We will see him in court, and we will pursue this matter to the fullest extent of the law." It was a public execution, delivered with the serene smile of a surgeon. In 2 minutes, she had completely rewritten the narrative. The Van Dorens were no longer desperate socialites clinging to a tech billionaire. They were the shrewd, aggrieved victims of a contemptible fraud. She had insulated her family and delivered Julian's head on a silver platter. With a final withering look that communicated utter revulsion, she turned, took Charlotte's arm, and began her regal, unhurried retreat down the aisle. Charlotte, for her part, played the role of the shattered bride beautifully. Her head bowed her Vera Wang veil, now a shroud of tragic dignity. Their departure broke the spell. The social fabric of the room tore apart. The guests, understanding the verdict had been delivered, began a mass exodus. It wasn't a panicked rush. It was a controlled, almost chilling stampede of the elite. No one made eye contact with Julian. He was radioactive, a social leper. A senator he'd golfed with last month hurried past, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. The wife of a tech CEO, who had gushed about his genius at a dinner party, literally turned her back as he looked her way, creating a physical wall of silk and disdain. The exodus was a sea of averted gazes and frantic whispers, 1,000 tiny knives of social shunning. He was left standing alone at an altar, built for a future that had just been firebombed. The opulent arrangements of peonies and hydrangeas, once symbols of his triumphant arrival, now seemed like funeral wreaths on the grave of his ambition. The only person who approached him was Damien. His brother's face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: guilt, fear, and a stubborn sliver of righteousness. "Julian, I had to." Damien started, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't let you. You've how?" Julian snarled, spinning to face him. The word was low, guttural, packed with a lifetime of fraternal rivalry, now curdled into pure hatred. "You sanctimonious little worm. You stood there, my best man, and you gutted me." "It was the truth," Damien shot back, finding a sliver of courage. Don't you remember? Don't you remember those nights on Orchard Street when you were sick with the flu and she stayed up for 48 hours straight, rewriting that entire algorithm from scratch because you said it wasn't elegant enough? Do you remember her crying when you finally got that first seed money? Not because of the money, but because she said, "We did it, Jules. We really did it." The memory so long suppressed lanced through Julian's fury. He did remember. He remembered the smell of cheap coffee and her hair as she fell asleep on his shoulder, the keyboard still warm. The memory made his betrayal feel even viler, and his rage surged to cover the shame. "You think you're a hero?" Julian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You just destroyed your own family for a woman who hasn't been part of our lives for years. You are dead to me. Do you understand? Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." Damien flinched as if struck. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a grey, hollow look of defeat. He opened his mouth to say something more, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, not down the main aisle, but through a small side door, disappearing like a coward. Julian was now truly alone. Except for her. He turned his gaze to the back of the chapel. Ava hadn't moved. The chaos had swirled around her, but she had remained a fixed point of stillness, the calm eye of the hurricane she had created. The document was a crumpled mess in her hand. Her shoulders were no longer squared with righteous fury. They were slumped with the profound, soul-deep exhaustion of a soldier who has won a war only to find the battlefield silent and empty. There was no look of triumph on her face, no gloating smirk. There was only a vast, hollow sadness. He felt an insane urge to rage at her, to blame her for all of this. He took a step down the aisle toward her. "Are you happy now?" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You got what you wanted. You ruined me." Ava finally looked at him, and her gaze traveled over the opulent, empty room, the wilting flowers, the abandoned programs littering the pews. Her eyes, when they met his, were filled not with hatred, but with a weary, devastating pity. "Look at all this, Julian," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the stillness. "Look at this grotesque theater you built. Did you really think this was winning?" She shook her head, slowly. "Nobody won here today. I just came to collect on a debt. The bill is paid. That's all." She let the crumpled document fall from her fingers. It fluttered to the stone floor, a forgotten casualty of the war. With that, she turned. For a moment, Julian thought she might say something else, offer one last word of damnation or farewell. But she didn't. She simply walked out of the massive oak doors and into the sunlight. Her simple white dress, a stark final rebuke to the Vera Wang-clad lie he had tried to build. She didn't look back. The moment she was gone, the silence was broken by a roar. The paparazzi held at bay until now surged past the overwhelmed security, their cameras flashing like a violent electrical storm. The noise was deafening, the questions shouted and incoherent. Julian felt a hand on his arm. It was Gavriel, his face grim. "Sir, we have to go. Now." Julian allowed himself to be pulled away, stumbling like a drunk. The flashes were blinding, each one feeling like a physical blow. He wasn't the brilliant tech mogul. He wasn't the society groom. He was just a story, a cautionary tale. The man who tried to buy a legacy and erase a history, only to lose everything in a single spectacular self-inflicted blast. He was worthless. And in the blinding glare of his public ruin, he knew with chilling certainty that it was the only true thing anyone would ever say about him again. The hours following Ava's departure were a blur of exquisite humiliation. Julian remained rooted to the spot at the altar, a statue in a Tom Ford tomb long after the last guest had fled. The flashes from the paparazzi outside the chapel doors were relentless, their ghostly light painting the stained glass windows in strobing infernal patterns. He felt like an animal in a zoo, his public caging complete. His security head. Gavriel finally materialized, his face a grim mask of failure. "Sir, we need to move you." Julian didn't respond. He was listening to the sound of his future being dismantled, one whispered phone call and one frantic news alert at a time. The hashtag #WeddingGate was already trending. The ride back to Manhattan was silent. Gavriel drove his eyes fixed on the road, the air in the car thick with unspoken recriminations. Julian's phone, which he'd left with his security team, was a vibrating brick of incoming notifications. He scrolled through them with numb fingers. Hundreds of missed calls. His lawyer, his PR chief, every single member of the Croft Innovations board, and a single brutal text from his brother. "I'm sorry. It was the right thing to do." Julian hurled the phone against the divider, where it shattered into a spiderweb of black glass. He spent that first night in his penthouse, a glass palace overlooking a city that now scorned him. He prowled its empty, cavernous rooms, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, watching his own immolation on every news channel. There was the footage Ava ethereal and damning in her white dress. Charlotte, her face a perfect mask of aristocratic fury. Victoria Van Doren, delivering her lethal proclamation. And him. Julian Croft, the self-made billionaire, looking small, trapped, and utterly defeated. The commentators were sharks in a feeding frenzy, tearing apart his reputation with glee, framing the story as a modern-day Icarus tale. He wasn't just a liar. He was a cliché. The business collapse was even swifter and more brutal than the social one. When the stock market opened at 9:30 a.m. on Monday, Croft Innovations CRFT was in free fall. Julian watched the ticker on a financial news network, the red arrow pointing down like a spear aimed at his heart. Billions of his net worth evaporated in minutes. The emergency board meeting was convened via video call that afternoon. It was a bloodbath. The members, men and women who had praised his genius and cashed his checks for years, now looked at him with cold contempt. Led by a hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, a man Julian had once considered a friend, they invoked a morals clause in his contract. "Your actions constitute gross misconduct and have caused irreparable reputational damage to this company." Thorne said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "We are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of the board." "You can't do this," Julian snarled, the scotch making him reckless. "I am this company." "No, Julian," Thorne replied coolly. "You're a liability. The board vote is unanimous. Your access will be terminated by the end of the day." The screen went blank. He was locked out of his own kingdom. The Van Doren lawsuit landed the next day. It was a work of legal savagery, a 50-page document detailing charges of fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and emotional distress. Their lawyers, a famously ruthless firm, leaked select damaging excerpts to the press, ensuring the narrative of Julian as a manipulative monster was cemented in the public consciousness. The cruelest cut came a week later. He saw his brother Damien on a morning news show. Looking tired but resolute, Damien gave a quiet, heartfelt interview, publicly apologizing to Ava Reynolds for his complicity and his silence. He explained how Julian's ambition had curdled into a corrosive greed that he could no longer stand by and witness. He announced he was leaving his position at Croft Innovations and taking a job with a legal aid society. Julian watched, shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. His own family had publicly chosen her side. The betrayal was absolute. The following months were a descent into a grey, featureless hell. Julian became a prisoner in his own home, the sprawling penthouse a gilded cage. He fired his household staff, unable to bear their pitying glances. He let the floor-to-ceiling windows gather a film of city grime, keeping the blinds drawn, living in a perpetual twilight. Paranoia became his only companion. He was convinced his phone was bugged, that every car parked across the street was a surveillance van. He spent his days obsessively scrolling through articles about his downfall, rereading the vicious comments, torturing himself with the evidence of his global disgrace. He saw photos of Charlotte in St. Bart's, laughing on a yacht with a handsome German duke, her trauma apparently assuaged by Mediterranean sun and new money. She had successfully rebranded herself as the resilient survivor. Meanwhile, a different story was taking shape across the East River. After the wedding, Ava had been hounded by the press. For 2 weeks, she was painted as the vengeful woman scorned, a narrative she found almost as suffocating as Julian's initial erasure. But she and Ben hunkered down, ignored the noise, and focused on the work. Using the notarized partnership agreement Damien had confessed to, and bolstered by Damien's public apology, Ava had leverage. She didn't want to sue for a piece of the dying Croft Innovations. She wanted a clean break. She wanted to build something new. She took a meeting with Athena Ventures, a female-led VC firm known for backing overlooked female founders. She didn't lead with the scandal. She led with the code. For 2 hours, she walked them through a new, more elegant and efficient logistics algorithm she had been developing in secret for the past year. It made the core technology of Croft Innovations look antiquated. The firm's lead partner, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, listened intently. At the end of the presentation, she leaned back. "The technology is brilliant, Ms. Reynolds, but the world knows you as the woman who crashed a wedding. Why should we invest in that?" Ava met her sis without flinching. "You shouldn't invest in the woman who crashed a wedding. You should invest in the woman who built the company that wedding was supposed to celebrate. The woman who was so ruthlessly effective that Julian Croft had to pay millions to silence her. I didn't crash a wedding to get revenge. I did it to get my name back. Now I want to put that name on a company that values integrity as much as innovation." She got the funding that afternoon. She called her new company Axis for the way it would become the new center of the industry. Her first hire was Ben. Her second was a young engineer she'd mentored years ago. She built her office in a bright, airy loft in Brooklyn, fostering a collaborative culture that was the antithesis of Julian's top-down, fear-driven regime. The Wired article titled "The Phoenix of Silicon Alley" was her public coronation. It told the full story, painting her not as a victim or a villain, but as a brilliant technologist who had reclaimed her power. The accompanying photo showed her at a whiteboard marker in hand, surrounded by her diverse, smiling team. She looked purposeful. She looked free. Reading that article was the final nail in the coffin of Julian's ego. He realized with a soul-crushing certainty that her rebellion had never truly been about him. Destroying him was just a necessary step in her process of creation. He was a footnote in her comeback story. This realization sparked a desperate final impulse. He needed to see her. He needed some form of closure, of absolution, of anything other than this suffocating indifference. He showered for the first time in days, put on a clean suit that hung loosely on his frame, and took a car to Brooklyn. When he walked into the bright, buzzing offices of Axis, it felt like stepping onto another planet. People were talking, laughing, collaborating. Ben Carter spotted him instantly, his friendly face hardening as he moved to intercept. "You have no right to be here, Julian." But Ava had already looked up from the whiteboard she was working at. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a weary resignation. She held up a hand to stop Ben, then nodded toward a small, glass-walled conference room. The silence inside was deafening. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time since that day in the chapel. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a calm, centered confidence. She was no longer the ghost of Orchard Street. She was the CEO of Axis. "I came to apologize," he began the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "For everything. For stealing your work, for breaking your heart, for trying to erase you. I was so lost, so desperate to prove I was worthy that I became a monster." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry." Ava listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she asked a simple, devastating question. "Are you apologizing because of what you did, Julian, or because you got caught?" The question hung in the air, a perfect, polished mirror reflecting his own pathetic soul. He wanted to scream, to protest, to insist his remorse was genuine. He tried to summon the righteous indignation, but it wouldn't come. He saw the truth laid bare in her unwavering gaze. He was sorry because he had lost. He was sorry because his name was worthless. His penthouse was a prison, and his life was empty. His apology was the final selfish act of a drowning man begging for a raft. He had no answer for her. His silence was his confession. A slow, sad nod was her only reply. "I thought so," she said softly. "I wasted a year of my life hating you. Then I wasted a few months being afraid of you. I'm done wasting my time on you, Julian. That day at the wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of my story with you. It was the only way I could get back to my own life, to my own work." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting and the end of them for good. "The thing is, I don't hate you anymore," she said, her voice clear and final, devoid of passion or malice. "To hate you would mean I still care. You're just a chapter I've finished, reading a bad investment I've finally written off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." She turned and walked out of the conference room, without a backward glance, immediately rejoining her team at the whiteboard, her back to him. Julian remained in the glass box, a specimen on display. He watched her point at the board, her team nodding eagerly, the energy of creation palpable even through the soundproof glass. He was an outsider looking in at a world he had helped create, but could never be a part of. He had been utterly and completely erased, not by a legal document or a public scandal, but by something far more permanent, her complete and total indifference. He walked out of the vibrant office and back into the grey afternoon. He was Julian Croft, the man who had everything and nothing, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, forever chained to the memory of a woman who had finally gloriously learned how to build a world without him. And so Julian Croft's gilded empire, built on a foundation of stolen ideas and profound betrayal, crumbled to dust. This wasn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It was a brutal lesson in consequences. It shows that the truth, no matter how deeply you bury it, has a way of clawing itself back into the light. Ava Reynolds didn't just crash a wedding. She reclaimed her life and her legacy, proving that true power isn't about the money you have, but the integrity you keep. Julian wanted to buy respectability, but he learned the hard way that it can only be earned. What would you have done in Ava's shoes? Would you have taken the money and stayed silent, or would you have risked it all for the truth? The silence in the Sterling mansion was a disease. It crept through the marble halls, climbed the grand staircase, and settled like a shroud over the master bedroom. For 3 months, Isabella Sterling had not felt the touch of her husband, Adrian. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off her now flinched if their fingers brushed. He was Adrian Sterling, a titan of industry, whose name commanded respect, yet in the presence of his own pregnant wife, he was a ghost. She told herself it was stress, the pressure of his empire. But as his coldness grew, a terrifying question began to bloom in the dark. What sin had she committed that made her own husband recoil from the very child he claimed to want? The answer was far more sinister than she could ever imagine. The Sterling name wasn't just old money, it was dynastic. Adrian Sterling, however, was a paradox, a man born to privilege who worked with the ferocity of a starved wolf. He'd taken his family's respectable real estate firm and forged it into Sterling Global, a behemoth that devoured skylines and reshaped cities. He was brilliant, ruthless, and until recently, utterly besotted with his wife, Isabella. Isabella Rossi had been a rising star in the art world, a curator with an uncanny eye for talent. She met Adrian at a gallery opening, and their connection was immediate and electric. He was drawn to her passion and authenticity, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships he was used to. She was captivated by the vulnerability hidden beneath his corporate armor. Their wedding was the stuff of legends, a fairy tale union of power and art. For 2 years, their life was an idyllic whirlwind. Then came the pregnancy. The positive test should have been the pinnacle of their joy. Adrian had been ecstatic, lifting her into his arms, his laughter echoing in their cavernous living room. He'd promised her the world, a safe and beautiful life for their child. The change began subtly, a week after the first trimester began. It started with a small, almost imperceptible flinch when she reached for his hand in bed. He'd pulled away, muttering something about a late-night email. Isabella, basking in the glow of early motherhood, thought nothing of it. But a week later, he moved his pillows to the far edge of their king-sized bed. The space between them grew from inches to a chasm. He stopped kissing her good-night, replacing the intimate gesture with a clipped, "Sleep well, Isabella." He never touched her belly. Not once. When the baby first kicked, she had cried out in joy, grabbing his hand to feel it. He had snatched it back as if her skin were his face a mask of something she couldn't decipher. Not anger, but something closer to fear. "Adrian, what is it?" she'd asked, her voice trembling. "Did you feel it?" "That was our baby." "I have a conference call," he'd said. His voice tight, his back already turned, as he walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the miracle happening inside her. The emotional distance soon became a physical one. He began working later, often coming home after she was asleep. The shared breakfasts they once cherished were replaced by a note from his assistant detailing his schedule. The mansion, once their shared sanctuary, became her gilded cage. Her primary companion became Adrian's mother, Beatrice Sterling. A woman sculpted from ice and disapproval, Beatrice had never fully endorsed the marriage. She saw Isabella's artistic spirit not as a virtue, but as a flighty, unsuitable trait for a Sterling bride. "Pregnancy can be so taxing on a man, dear," Beatrice said one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she watched Isabella struggle to arrange flowers. "Adrian is building an empire. He needs his focus. The messiness of it all can be distracting for a man of his caliber. It's not messy, Beatrice. It's a baby." Isabella countered, her patience wearing thin. "His baby." Beatrice simply smiled, a thin, cutting motion of her lips. "Of course, dear. Just be sure not to overwhelm him with your needs." The isolation was suffocating. Isabella's friends intimidated by the sterling wealth, and Adrian's increasingly cold demeanor began to drift away. She tried to busy herself with designing the nursery, a wonderland of soft creams and gentle animal motifs, but the joy was hollow. Every tiny sock, every miniature blanket was a painful reminder of the partner she was losing. One night, desperation clawed at her. She put on the silk negligee he'd bought her on their honeymoon in Positano, a whisper of fabric that had once driven him mad. She waited for him in the living room, the city lights twinkling below their penthouse window. He walked in just after midnight, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He saw her, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of the old Adrian appeared in his eyes, a spark of desire and love. But it was extinguished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same guarded, pained expression. "Isabella, you should be in bed," he said, his voice flat. He walked past her, not even glancing at her attire, and headed straight for the bar to pour a scotch. Tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to see you. I miss you, Adrian. We never talk anymore. You won't even look at me." He gripped the crystal tumbler so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'm busy. The acquisition in Tokyo is taking all my time." "This isn't about Tokyo," she cried, her voice breaking. "This started when I became pregnant. Do you not want this baby anymore? Is that it? Did you change your mind?" He turned to face her, his face a landscape of torment. "Don't be ridiculous. Everything I do is for this family." "Then why won't you touch me?" She whispered, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Why do you look at me like I'm a stranger, or worse, like I'm diseased?" His composure finally cracked. A raw anguish flashed across his face. "You don't understand." He ground out, his voice hoarse. "I am protecting you. I am protecting this family. Just do as I say. Rest, stay healthy, and don't ask me these questions again." He downed the scotch in one go and retreated to the guest bedroom, a room he now occupied more than their own. The heavy click of the door shutting was the sound of her heart breaking. It wasn't an affair. She was almost certain of that. It was something deeper, something colder, and it was inexplicably tied to the child growing within her. The days bled into weeks, each one a carbon copy of the last. The chasm between them widened until it felt uncrossable. Isabella began to feel like a ghost in her own home, haunting the periphery of her husband's life. The only evidence of his care came in the form of sterile third-party actions. A world-renowned obstetrician was hired, a nutritionist planned her every meal, and a prenatal yoga instructor visited the mansion twice a week. He was providing for her body, but starving her soul. Her mind left to fester. In the silence began to invent scenarios. The most logical and most painful was another woman. Had he reconnected with someone from his past, someone more suited to his world of cutthroat business and cold calculation? Her suspicion began to center on a name she hadn't heard in years. Genevieve Dubois. Genevieve had been Adrian's college girlfriend, and for a time his business partner. She was sharp, ambitious, and as Beatrice had once gleefully informed Isabella, the one that got away. Their breakup had been acrimonious, tied to a business disagreement, where Adrian had ultimately triumphed, pushing her out of a lucrative early venture. Isabella knew it was a long shot, but she was desperate for an explanation. Any explanation that wasn't about her or the baby. One evening, driven by a need for answers, She did something she had never done before she went into Adrian's home office. The room was a monument to his success, sleek, minimalist, and impersonal. She sat in his leather chair, the scent of his cologne still lingering. Her fingers hovered over his laptop before she pulled back, unable to breach that final wall of privacy. Instead, her eyes scanned the room. On his desk, nestled between a stack of financial reports and a blueprint for a new tower, was his personal tablet. It was unlocked. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was a betrayal of his trust, but he had already shattered hers. With trembling hands, she opened his messages. She scrolled through conversations with executives, lawyers, and his mother. Then she saw it. A thread with a name she didn't recognize, G.D. The messages were cryptic. G.D. Any change, Adrian? No. The protocol is difficult, but I'm maintaining it. G.D. You're doing the right thing, Adrian. It's the only way to ensure a positive outcome. Adrian. It's tearing me apart. She looks at me, and I see nothing but confusion in her eyes. G.D. Steel yourself. A few months of hardship for a lifetime of health. Remember what's at stake. Isabella's blood ran cold. Protocol. A positive outcome. It sounded clinical, detached. Who was G.D. and what hold did she have over him? She scrolled up her breath, catching in her throat as she found an earlier message. G.D. The preliminary report from the European lab is in. It's what we feared. We need to talk immediately. I've booked a flight. Attached was a file, but it was encrypted, impossible to open. The date of that message corresponded almost exactly to the day Adrian's behavior had changed. It was the proof she needed. He wasn't just having an affair. He was conspiring with this woman about the baby. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a few days later. Beatrice was visiting, overseeing the delivery of an antique crib she had insisted on buying. Adrian's phone, left on the kitchen island, buzzed incessantly. Isabella glanced at the screen. It was a call from a Genevieve. G.D. Genevieve Dubois. The name hit her like a physical blow. It was her. The ghost from his past was back, and she was pulling the strings of Isabella's present misery. That night, Isabella confronted him again. She found him in the guest room, staring out the window, his silhouette rigid with tension. I know about Genevieve, she said, her voice eerily calm. Adrian spun around, his face paling. What are you talking about, G.D.? The messages on your tablet, the phone calls. You're talking to her again. All this time you've been lying to me. The words tasted like ash. Is she why you can't touch me? Are you leaving me for her? Just be a man and tell me, Adrian. Don't make me live through this lie for one more day. She wanted him to deny it, to laugh and pull her into his arms. Instead, his expression hardened, his jaw setting like granite. You went through my private messages. You left me with no choice. You've abandoned me. What is this protocol you're discussing with her? What positive outcome? The questions tumbled out, laced with hurt and anger. Is she pregnant too? Is that it? Are you trying to decide which family to choose? Stop it, Isabella, he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with an affair. Then what is it? She screamed, the sound echoing in the sterile room. What could possibly be worse than that? What have you and that woman cooked up that makes you look at your own pregnant wife with disgust? He took a step towards her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a second, she thought he might finally break, might finally tell her the truth. But the walls went up again, higher and thicker than ever before. Genevieve is A consultant, he said, the lie clumsy on his tongue. She is a specialist in a private medical matter. That's all. It concerns the long-term health of this family, and that's all I can tell you. A private medical matter who's mine? A new chilling fear crept in. Am I sick, Adrian? Is something wrong with the baby? Is that why you won't touch me? Are we contagious? She was half joking, her voice hysterical. But the look on his face stopped her cold. He didn't deny it. He just stared at her with those tormented, pitying eyes. You need to trust me, he said, his voice barely a whisper. This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I am doing it for you. Please, believe that. But she couldn't. Trust was a currency they no longer shared. The involvement of Genevieve Dubois had poisoned everything. Isabella was now convinced of a cruel conspiracy. Adrian and his ex-lover were planning to take her baby. Perhaps they would declare her an unfit mother, using her emotional distress they were causing as proof. It was a monstrous thought, but in the silence of the Sterling mansion, monstrous things seemed possible. She had to fight back, not just for herself, but for her unborn child. To understand the depth of Adrian's deception, one must understand the lie that held him captive. It was a lie of breathtaking cruelty, engineered by two women scorned. Weeks before, just after the first ultrasound, Adrian had received a call from his mother, Beatrice. Her voice was laced with a gravity that immediately set him on edge. Adrian, we need to talk. It's about Isabella, she had said. Something has come to my attention. Something delicate. They met in the sterile quiet of Beatrice's Upper East Side apartment. With her was Genevieve Dubois. Adrian was stunned. He hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. She looked different, harder, her ambition now honed to a razor's edge. She was, he knew, a senior executive at a cutting-edge Swiss biotech firm. Genevieve has some concerns. Beatrice began letting the other woman take the lead. Genevieve's demeanor was one of somber professionalism. She explained that through a mutual acquaintance at a diagnostic lab in Europe, a flag had been raised on some of Isabella's routine prenatal blood work, which had been sent for advanced genetic sequencing as per the premium package Adrian had paid for. It's a condition we've only recently been able to identify. Genevieve said, her voice low and serious. She slid a thick, heavily watermarked file across the table. It's called haploreactive gestational syndrome, or HRGS. The name was fabricated, a meaningless string of scientific-sounding words. But to Adrian, it sounded terrifyingly real. It's an incredibly rare recessive gene, primarily found in certain artistic communities in northern Italy. Genevieve continued a masterful touch, targeting Isabella's specific heritage. The gene itself is dormant, benign, but it has a specific catastrophic trigger: prolonged skin-to-skin contact with the paternal DNA source during gestation. Adrian stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. Paternal DNA source. You mean me? Yes, Genevieve said gravely. The hormonal changes during pregnancy activate the dormant gene in the mother. When exposed to your cells through touch, hugging, sleeping in the same bed, any sustained contact, a cytotoxic reaction begins. It's painless at first, but it's systemic. It attacks the mother's vascular system and, tragically, the placental barrier. Beatrice placed a cold hand on her son's arm. What is she saying in plain English? Genevieve looked at Adrian, her eyes full of feigned pity. The prognosis, if the protocol isn't followed, is absolute. The reaction causes a complete breakdown of the placenta late in the second or early in the third trimester. It's fatal for the child, and in over 90% of documented cases, the resulting hemorrhagic shock is fatal for the mother. The air left Adrian's lungs. The room tilted. Fatal. The word slammed into him. Isabella. His baby. Both gone. No, he whispered. That's impossible. Her doctors here said she's perfectly healthy. They wouldn't know to look for it, Genevieve countered smoothly. HRGS is a discovery from my company's research wing. The diagnostic test is proprietary. American hospitals don't have it. We only caught it because our lab in Zurich is the only one in the world that screens for it. She presented him with charts, graphs, and cellular diagrams, all beautifully forged, all utterly meaningless. But to a layman, they looked like irrefutable proof. What do we do? Adrian asked, his voice hoarse. There must be a treatment, a cure. This was the hook. There is a protocol, Genevieve said, and it has a near 100% success rate if followed perfectly. The key is absolute isolation from the paternal trigger. No physical contact. None. Separate rooms, separate beds. It's crucial to halt the progression of the cytotoxic reaction. Then my company has developed an antigen therapy, an infusion that must be administered during the 36th week, which neutralizes the gene permanently. After the birth contact can resume as normal. Beatrice, playing her part to perfection, gasped. You mean he can't touch his own wife? For the entire pregnancy, it is the only way to save her life, Genevieve said, her tone final, and the life of his child. Adrian felt like he was drowning. The cruelty of it was Shakespearean. To save his wife and child, he had to become a monster to them. He had to withdraw his love, his comfort, his touch at the very moment she would need it most. He had to inflict unimaginable emotional pain to prevent a catastrophic physical one. Why would you do this for me, Genevieve? He asked, a sliver of his old suspicion surfacing. After everything? Genevieve's mask of concern was flawless. Because nobody deserves this, Adrian. And whatever our past, I am a scientist first. I couldn't live with myself if I knew this, and said nothing. Beatrice sealed the deal. This is a test from God, Adrian. It is a burden you must carry alone. You cannot tell Isabella. The psychological stress could be just as damaging. She would never understand. She would think you're mad. She might even try to touch you to prove you wrong. You must be strong for her. You must be the villain to be her savior. He was trapped. The lie was perfect, a she built of love and fear. He agreed to everything. He would fund Genevieve's antigen research to the tune of millions of dollars, paid to an offshore account for her discretion. He would follow the protocol to the letter. He would become cold, distant, and cruel, all in the name of saving the two people he loved most in the world. Every pained look from Isabella, every tear she shed, was a knife in his gut. But he held firm, clinging to Genevieve's words. A few months of hardship for a lifetime of health. He was playing a role, the most difficult of his life. He was the lonely guardian of a terrible secret, bearing Isabella's hatred as a shield to protect her from a danger she couldn't see. He had no idea the danger was standing right beside him, wearing a lab coat and a sympathetic smile. Isabella couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. The theory that Adrian and Genevieve were plotting to take her child had taken root in her heart, a poisonous vine strangling all reason. She watched Adrian move through their home, his face etched with a pain she now interpreted as guilt. His torment wasn't for her. It was for the betrayal he was planning. She knew she couldn't survive this alone. She needed an ally, an expert, someone whose authority, Adrian, a man who respected only power and expertise, could not dismiss. She needed the best doctor money could buy. She spent a day researching not just for top obstetricians, but for perinatal specialists, geneticists, the heads of departments at the most prestigious hospitals in the country. One name kept appearing: Dr. Anya Sharma, the chief of maternal fetal medicine at Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan. Dr. Sharma was renowned not just for her clinical skill, but for her work in complex, high-risk pregnancies and her direct, no-nonsense approach. Isabella called the office herself, her voice shaking as she explained she needed a second opinion on a complicated and sensitive matter. The urgency in her tone must have been palpable, because the scheduler found her an appointment for the following week. Now she had to get Adrian there. She approached him that evening, not with accusations or tears, but with a cold, hard resolve that mirrored his own. "I've made an appointment," she said, standing in the doorway of his study. "My assistant handles your appointments, Isabella. Everything is scheduled." "Not with my current doctor," she said. "This is with Dr. Anya Sharma at Lenox Hill. It's for Tuesday at 10 a.m. We are both going." Adrian looked up from his work, his brow furrowed. "That's unnecessary. You have the best care." "The best care isn't working, is it?" she shot back. "Something is wrong, Adrian. You've said it yourself, this is a private medical matter." "Well, I'm done with secrets. We are going to sit in a room with a real expert, and you are going to tell her and me exactly what is going on. Either you come with me, or I will go alone and tell her that my husband believes I am diseased and refuses to touch me." I wonder what a doctor of her standing would make of that. It was an ultimatum, and they both knew it. She saw the panic flash in his eyes. His carefully constructed wall was being threatened by an outside force he couldn't control. "Isabella, you don't understand the risk," he started, his voice pleading. "No," she said, her voice like steel. "You don't understand. I am your wife. This is my body and my child. I will have the truth. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Be there." She turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of power. The morning of the appointment was thick with tension. Adrian was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his armor for the battle ahead. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he drove them into the city. He tried one last time in the car. "Please, let's not do this," he said. His voice strained. "It's not safe. The safest place for a pregnant woman is with a doctor." "Adrian," she replied, looking out the window. As they walked into the polished, quiet lobby of the maternal fetal medicine unit at Lenox Hill, Adrian's phone buzzed. It was a text from Genevieve. "GD, your mother told me what you're doing. This is a catastrophic mistake. You cannot expose the situation to an outside physician. They are not equipped. You will jeopardize the entire protocol. Leave now." Adrian's blood turned to ice. He looked at Isabella, already checking in at the front desk, her posture determined. He was trapped between two impossible choices: betray the woman who held the supposed cure, or betray the wife who was demanding the truth. He pocketed his phone, his heart hammering against his ribs, and followed his wife down the hall. Dr. Anya Sharma was a woman in her 50s with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of unshakable competence. She listened patiently as Isabella, in a rush of emotion, explained the situation. She didn't recount her theory about Genevieve taking her baby. It sounded too hysterical. Instead, she stuck to the facts. My husband, for the past 3 months, he has refused to touch me. He sleeps in a separate room. He says he is protecting me, that there's a medical reason for it, but he won't tell me what it is. I am perfectly healthy. My checkups are normal, but he is convinced that something is terribly wrong. I am scared, Doctor, and I am so alone. Dr. Sharma nodded, her expression unreadable. She then turned her calm, perceptive gaze to Adrian. Mr. Sterling, would you care to explain your side of this? Adrian sat stiffly, his hands clasped on his knees. This was the moment, the point of no return. He swallowed hard. Doctor, he began, his voice raspy. I have been privy to information from a specialist in Europe, a biotech firm. They've identified a condition, something my wife has. And what is this condition called? Dr. Sharma asked, picking up a pen. Adrian's throat was dry. He could feel Isabella's eyes burning into the side of his face. He had to say it. He had to trust the lie. It's called haploreactive gestational syndrome, HRGS. Dr. Sharma wrote it down without a flicker of recognition. I've been in this field for 30 years, Mr. Sterling. I've attended conferences all over the world. I have never heard of it. Please enlighten me. Adrian, clinging to the details Genevieve had drilled into him, began to explain. He spoke of the dormant gene, the northern Italian heritage, the cytotoxic reaction triggered by paternal touch, the breakdown of the placenta, the absolute fatality for mother and child. He explained the entire protocol of isolation. As he spoke, he watched Dr. Sharma's face. He expected to see concern, alarm, perhaps even professional curiosity. He saw none of it. Her calm expression slowly morphed into one of profound, unmistakable disbelief. She wasn't looking at him like he was a concerned husband. She was looking at him like he was a fool. When he finished, the room was silent. Isabella was staring at him, her face a canvas of horror and confusion. This was his secret. This bizarre science fiction plague. Dr. Sharma put down her pen. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Adrian's, and then she delivered the words that would shatter his world. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice soft but laced with an iron authority. I have to be very clear with you. What you have just described is not a recognized medical condition. It does not exist. Adrian stared at her. What? No, that's not possible. I have the data, the reports. Reports can be falsified, Dr. Sharma said gently. Let me be more specific. The biological mechanism you described is a scientific impossibility. A mother's body is designed to tolerate the paternal DNA within the fetus. That's the very basis of pregnancy. A cytotoxic reaction triggered by external skin contact with the father. It defies the fundamental principles of immunology and genetics. It sounds like something from a very poorly written movie. She turned to Isabella. Isabella, from all the records I've reviewed, and from what I see here, you are a perfectly healthy woman, having a perfectly normal pregnancy. Then she turned back to Adrian, her gaze sharpening. "Mr. Sterling, you have been fed a lie, a very elaborate and cruel one. There is no such thing as HRGS. There is no danger. Your touch cannot harm your wife or your baby. In fact, the stress and isolation you have inflicted upon her, based on this fiction, is likely the only medical risk present in this room today." Adrian felt the floor drop out from under him. The doctor's words echoed in the sterile air, dismantling his reality piece by piece. A scientific impossibility. Falsified. A lie. He looked at the files he'd brought the data from Genevieve, that he had guarded like a holy text. It was all fake. The millions of dollars. The torment. The self-imposed exile. The cruelty to his wife. All of it based on nothing. He looked at Isabella. Her face was pale tears, streaming silently down her cheeks. But behind the tears was a dawning horror, the realization of the truth. He hadn't been protecting her. He had been torturing her. The blood drained from Adrian's face. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. He felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to grip the arms of his chair to keep from collapsing. The doctor's words replayed in his mind, a very elaborate and cruel lie. And in that moment, seeing the devastation on his wife's face, Adrian Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who could move markets with a word, felt the full crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. He wasn't a savior. He was a pawn, and he had hurt the only person he had been trying to save. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was utterly devastatingly pale. The drive back from Lenox Hill was a journey through a wasteland. The silence in the car was no longer cold and empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the wreckage of Adrian's colossal mistake. Isabella stared out her window, the city a blur of motion she didn't see. The truth was far more insane than any scenario she had imagined. He wasn't having an affair. He wasn't trying to steal their child. He had been convinced that loving her was a death sentence. Adrian drove on autopilot, Dr. Sharma's words echoing in his head. A lie. Falsified. A scientific impossibility. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his pride and self-assuredness. He had built an empire on his ability to read people, to see through deception, to anticipate every move. Yet he had been played masterfully by his own mother and his ex-lover. They hadn't used financial projections or market analysis. They had weaponized his love for his family against him. He risked a glance at Isabella. The tears had stopped, but her face was a mask of grief. He had done this. His refusal to trust her, to include her, to believe in their partnership over the word of a vengeful ex and a manipulative mother, had caused this chasm between them. Bella. He began, his voice cracking. The old pet name felt alien on his tongue. I am so sorry. She didn't turn. Sorry for what, Adrian? She asked, her voice hollow. Sorry for believing I was a walking biohazard. Sorry for putting me through months of psychological torment, or just sorry you got caught. Sorry for all of it. He whispered, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. I thought I was protecting you. I swear to you I believed every word. I was so terrified of losing you. You were losing me anyway. She cut in, finally turning to face him, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen in months. Every single day you pushed me further away. You could have talked to me, Adrian. We could have faced this together. But you didn't trust me. You trusted her. Genevieve. A woman who hates me. A woman you pushed out of a company. You trusted her over your own wife. He had no defense. She was right. He had been arrogant, thinking he alone could carry this burden. When they arrived back at the penthouse, the atmosphere was charged, as if summoned by the climax of the drama she had set in motion. Beatrice Sterling was waiting for them in the living room, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Adrian, I was so worried. I trust you came to your senses and left that hospital," she said, her voice bright and brittle. Adrian walked past her, his face grim. "The appointment was very illuminating, Mother." Beatrice's smile faltered as she saw Isabella's tear-stained face and the thunderous expression on her son's. "What happened?" "The truth happened," Isabella said, finding her voice. "The truth about your disgusting, pathological lie." Just then the private elevator chimed and the doors opened. Out stepped Genevieve Dubois, looking sleek and confident. She was holding a briefcase. "Adrian," she began, a hint of reprimand in her tone. "You have no idea the damage you could have caused today. I came as soon as I could. We need to repair." She stopped as she took in the scene. The jig was up. It was written on all their faces. Adrian turned to face the two women, his architects of misery. The grief on his face was slowly being replaced by a cold, controlled fury, the fury he usually reserved for the boardroom. Haploreactive gestational syndrome. He said the words tasting like poison. "Did you enjoy creating it? Did the two of you sit up at night laughing as you invented the most sadistic possible way to tear my family apart?" Beatrice drew herself up. "We did what was necessary. That woman was not right for you, for our family. Her bloodline is common. I wanted to protect our legacy. My legacy is in this room." "Mother," Adrian roared, gesturing wildly towards Isabella. "It is my wife and my unborn child. The two people you tried to destroy with this fantasy." He then turned his sights on Genevieve, who stood frozen by the elevator. "And you, how much was it? How much did I pay for your proprietary research?" 2 million. 3. Was it worth it? Genevieve. Was the revenge that sweet Genevieve, seeing her plan crumble, switched tactics from deceit to venom? You deserved it, Adrian. You built your empire on my ideas, on the company you stole from me. You threw me away. I wanted you to feel a fraction of the powerlessness I felt, and your mother was more than happy to help. Isabella finally spoke, her voice shaking but strong. You didn't just hurt him. You used my pregnancy, my child, as a weapon in your pathetic little vendetta. You are monsters. Both of you. Beatrice scoffed. Don't be so dramatic, dear. It was for the best. That was the final straw for Adrian. He walked over to his mother, his face inches from hers. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously low. Get out of my home and get out of my life. You are no longer my mother. You are a stranger to me. And if you ever try to contact me or my wife again, I will use every ounce of my power to ruin you. He then looked at Genevieve. As for you, my lawyers will be in touch. Expect a lawsuit for fraud that will dismantle your career and your life so thoroughly you'll wish you'd never heard the name Sterling. Now get out. Beatrice paled, genuinely shocked. Genevieve, pragmatic to the end, turned without a word and stepped back into the elevator. Beatrice lingered, sputtering Adrian. You can't mean this. Try me, he snarled. defeated. Beatrice followed Genevieve into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and they were gone. The silence that returned was different. It was clean. The poison had been excised. But the wound was vast and deep. Adrian turned to Isabella, his face crumbling. All the anger was gone, replaced by a profound, bottomless shame. He looked like a lost boy. "Bella," he whispered. "I know sorry isn't enough. I don't know what is. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to fix this, trying to earn you back." He took a hesitant step towards her, his hand outstretched, not to touch her, but as a plea. For months, he had been forbidden from doing so by a lie. Now he was forbidden by the truth of his own actions. Isabella looked at her husband, the man she loved, the man who had wounded her so deeply. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the agony of his regret. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was a path they would have to walk together. Slowly, deliberately, she took his hand. His skin was warm, real. His touch didn't hurt. It wasn't a poison. It was just a beginning. The confrontation was a detonation, leaving behind a silence more profound and unsettling than the one that had preceded it for months. Beatrice and Genevieve were gone, spectres exorcised from the penthouse, but their poison lingered in the air. Adrian and Isabella stood in the vast living room, separated by a chasm, not of physical distance, but of action and consequence. The truth had set them free from the lie, only to imprison them in a new, more complex reality. Adrian was a man adrift. The core tenets of his existence, his judgment, his control, his ability to protect his family, had been systematically dismantled. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time, without the filter of Genevieve's fiction, and saw the full extent of the damage. The exhaustion in her eyes, the protective way she cradled her belly, the slight tremor in her hands. It was all his doing. A wave of self-loathing so potent it was physically nauseating washed over him. He who had vowed to be her shield had been the sword that struck her. Bella. He choked out the name, a shard of glass in his throat. She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible reaction that cut him deeper than any shout could have. "Don't," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I can't. Not right now." She turned and walked towards the master bedroom. Her movements weary, each step an effort. The quiet click of the door shutting was a judgment. The first few days were a masterclass in navigating a shared space as strangers. He would hear her moving about, the soft sounds of her existence, a constant, painful reminder of his failure. He abandoned his suite of offices downtown, telling his stunned executive team he was taking an indefinite leave of absence. He couldn't command an empire when he couldn't even manage the landscape of his own home. He began by moving his belongings back into their bedroom, but his humility was so absolute that he couldn't bring himself to get into their bed. He took the plush chaise lounge in the corner, a piece of furniture they had bought together in a happier time. He would lie there for hours in the dark, watching the slow, even rhythm of her breathing as she slept, a silent, wretched vigil. He knew grand gestures would be hollow. What use was a diamond bracelet to a woman whose trust he had ground to dust? He had to show, not declare. He had to serve. He, a man who had personal chefs on 2 continents, entered their state-of-the-art kitchen with the intention of cooking for her. He found one of her grandmother's old cookbooks and attempted a simple pasta pomodoro. The result was a catastrophe. The sauce was scorched, the pasta was a gelatinous lump, and a fine dusting of flour covered nearly every surface. He stood there in his $1,000 shirt, covered in tomato stains, the titan of industry defeated by a simple meal. When Isabella walked in, drawn by the smell of burning garlic, she stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at the mess, then at him, and for the first time in days, a complex emotion flickered in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall of her grief. He saw a glimmer of the woman who had once found his boardroom seriousness endearing. Without a word, he began to clean up. He scrubbed every pot, wiped every counter, and when the kitchen was pristine again, he quietly ordered from her favorite neighborhood trattoria. They ate in near silence, but he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. His failure had been more eloquent than any success could have been. It was an admission of his fallibility, a humanizing act that made him seem less like a monster and more like the fool he felt he was. The turning point came a week later. He had spent days not just thinking but researching, trying to understand what he had taken from her. It wasn't just her peace of mind, it was her identity. She was Isabella Rossi. The curator before, she was Isabella Sterling, the millionaire's wife. He had absorbed her into his world, and in doing so had inadvertently erased hers. He found her in the nursery, softly humming to their unborn child. He stood in the doorway, holding a simple leather portfolio. "Isabella," he said, his voice soft, not wanting to startle her. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" She nodded, her hand resting on her belly. He walked in and handed her the portfolio. "I know that what I did, words can't fix it. And money can't fix it, I know that. But I've been thinking about what you've lost. What we lost, and it started long before Genevieve's lies." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside wasn't a stock certificate or a deed to some tropical island. It was a business proposal, a prospectus, and the keys to a physical location. He had acquired a beautiful light-filled gallery space in Soho, a street-level property with soaring ceilings and perfectly weathered brick walls. It was the kind of space she used to dream about. He had also established an endowment for its operation for the first 5 years, insulating it from any financial pressure. "It's yours," he said quietly. "Not as a gift from me to you, but as a way to give you back to yourself. There are no strings. You can run it, sell it, or let it sit empty. It's your space, your world." I just wanted to reopen the door. Tears welled in her eyes. This was an apology, written in a language she understood. It wasn't about the cost, it was about the thought. He saw her the woman she was, the passion that drove her. He wasn't just trying to patch up their marriage. He was trying to restore her soul. She looked from the portfolio to his face and saw a man desperately trying to rebuild a world he had helped demolish. "Thank you, Adrian," she whispered, the first truly warm words she had offered him. The real thaw came that weekend. They were in the living room, a fragile truce holding them in separate orbits. She was on the sofa sketching ideas for the gallery, and he was across the room pretending to read a financial journal. Suddenly the baby gave a kick so powerful it made her gasp. "Wow," she breathed. "He's going to be a soccer player." Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes wide, with a desperate, hopeful longing. For months he had been terrified of this life inside her. Now it was the only thing that felt real and good. Isabella watched his face, saw the raw hunger for connection there. The resentment she harbored warred with a deeper, more primal instinct to share this miracle. She took a breath. Would you like to feel?" He was across the room in an instant, his movements clumsy with eagerness. He knelt before her, his body trembling slightly. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the phantom fear of Genevieve's lie still echoing in his muscle memory. Then he slowly, reverently placed his palm on her stomach. The space was electric. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a distinct, powerful thump pressed against his hand from within. It was his undoing. A choked sob escaped his lips. The sheer, undeniable fact of his child, alive and strong, crashed against the wall of his guilt and shame. And the wall broke. He rested his forehead against her, and the tears he had held back for months finally came hot and silent. He wasn't just crying for his foolishness. He was crying with overwhelming gratitude for this second chance, for the life he had almost forsaken. Isabella felt his tears soak through her dress. Her own eyes filled. Without thinking, her hand went to his head, her fingers weaving into his hair, holding him. It wasn't a calculated act of forgiveness. It was an impulse of pure empathy. In his brokenness, she found the husband she had fallen in love with, the vulnerable man behind the Titan. That night, they talked. For hours. He confessed the immense pressure of his upbringing, the constant weight of the sterling legacy, his mother's belief that emotion was a liability. She told him of her own fears of feeling like a beautiful object he had acquired, of losing her voice in the echo chamber of their wealth. It was a raw, painful, and utterly necessary conversation. They laid their broken pieces out on the table and together began to see how they might fit back together. Weeks later, when Isabella went into labor, Adrian was no longer a terrified bystander, but an active, engaged partner. He breathed with her, through every contraction. He was her fierce advocate with the hospital staff. He held her, supported her, and drew a strength from her that he never knew he possessed. When their son Leo was born, the nurse, following standard procedure, prepared to place the swaddled infant on Isabella's chest. But Adrian, his eyes filled with a love so pure it was dazzling, asked, "May I?" The nurse handed him his son. He held the tiny 7-pound miracle, looked into his impossibly new eyes, and felt his world recalibrate around a new, unshakable center. He then walked to Isabella's side, leaned down, and gently placed Leo into her waiting arms, creating their first family embrace. He kissed her, a kiss that tasted of salt and relief, and a future they had almost lost. He then kissed his son's head. He was touching them both. His family. Whole, healthy, and finally, truly safe. The sterling legacy wasn't steel and glass. It was flesh and blood, held together by a love that had been tested in the cruelest of fires and had, against all odds, emerged stronger. The story of Adrian and Isabella Sterling is a harrowing reminder that the most damaging lies are often the ones we accept out of fear. It shows that true strength isn't about bearing burdens alone, but about having the courage to trust the one you love. Their journey from a gilded cage of suspicion to a hard-won peace proves that even the deepest wounds can be healed through honesty, forgiveness, and the simple, powerful act of reaching out for another's hand. What did you think of Adrian's impossible choice? Was his mother's manipulation the ultimate betrayal, or was Genevieve's revenge more sinister? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and if you were moved by this story of love, lies, and redemption, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a good story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content that will leave you thinking. Thank you for listening.